For this process, the way I have it planned out, there's really only three tables in this database that are being used. One is the Delta Data Compare, and that holds your base level data comparisons that you want to run. And then you have the column names for each table that's in the Delta Data Compare table. And then you have Delta key columns that tells you which key columns you want to compare against for those tables. So when I take a look in the data compare table, so what I see here is a start DB server and a compare end DB server. It's a little misleading here. So the start DB server is actually the name of the server. Like for instance, I have a linked server called dev16, and so that goes off to the dev16 DB2 database. And since they have schemas and tables, I'm naming that server. Here's the schema WCBE, and the table is offer. And then there's a compare start DB where clause. So these are the records I want, where published equals 1. This is what I'm going to compare against. And then there's a compare end DB server. This actually isn't the server. This is more the name of the database. And then here's the table that we're comparing against. And it's got the same things, compare end DB where clause. If there's a where clause on this table that we want to pull data from. Then there's a, let me skip dynamic joins, end table row changed column. So this is the name of the column that we're going to put in what kind of change it is, whether it's a delete, update, or insert, and then whether it's active. So if this is not active, then your stored procedure will not run it. And then in here, we've got our dynamic join. Let me just go ahead and take a look at that. I'll open up my trusty text editor, and I'll copy this, give that a second. But essentially, anything that you want to put in there, that's a specific join that you want to be a part of the query when you're pulling or comparing information from these two tables that you have lined up here. Let me see if this is opening. All right, so we can see we're setting up a table on the left, or one of the tables is going to have a pseudonym or pseudonym E, and the other one is S. So so this is your dev16 linked server, and that's going to be S. And then we've got the other server, which is going to be your local table, is going to be E. So we're naming it here, and then we start setting up these dynamic joins. So I think this all looks pretty familiar to you. And then the only other, actually let me leave this open. The only other artifact in this database that's really important right now is this temp run single delta. So that's the name of my stored procedure right now. It's a terrible name, and I just never changed it back as I was experimenting with it, and that's what it is right now. Obviously it needs to change. So in here there's only one active table, or one active record, and so this query will get that for us. We'll take a look at that. Let's also take a look at the column names. So here's the column names that we're going to be comparing. One second. So there's a comparison ID, so that's from here in the Delta table compare. And then there's a start table column name. So here's the columns that we're going to compare against the end table column names, and then a normalized column name. So these names might be different. Like here, it's field 1 in the WCBE database. It's offer ID PDB in the WCS database. And then what I want it to come out as is ID. And then I'm going to normalize the data type too. And so that's where this comes in. It tells me what data type I'm looking for in that column. And then here, we'll also take a look at the key columns. So these are the columns that these tables have foreign key relationships with. Um, let's see. And then when we take a look at the stored procedure, here's what it's doing. So we're setting up a bunch of variables, and then we're populating those variables. So I loop through everything in the delta data compare table, and I look for everything that's actually active. And then I set a little log entry. And here is where I'm building the name of the table that I'm going to use in my code. And then this, I'm building a name of a table that's going to hold the results. And that's going to be my delta table that I can take a look at. You can see some of those over here already that have already been built. And then, so I get the end table, I get the column list, list of columns. So the difference between the start column list and the end column list and the list of columns. So this is the start table, this is the end table, and this is the normalized list of table. It's from the normalized column name. And then there's a where clause and an end table where clause if those need to be included. And so it populates those variables. And then we get a join clause for the tables. And we'll see all that as it comes out, because we're making just a simple dynamic SQL statement here. So the first thing I'm doing is any temp tables I've used previously I'm dropping. And then I recreate them by filling them with data. And let's actually walk through this. So if I use a print statement, what I'll see for some reason it's going very slow right now. So I'll see I don't get all the information that I want. It gets truncated here. I'm not sure why. Maybe you know how to change that. So I'm going to change this and just use a select. Whoops. Hit the wrong key. F5. Alright, and then I'll run this. Copy that. I'm going to put it in a text editor. And then all my commands or statements or whatever, they end with a semicolon. So if I do a replace, find a semicolon, replace it with a line break, and then allow it to wrap. So I'll essentially see what's going on here. So I'm dropping my tables, and then I insert something into the log telling it what I'm doing, and then my first select statement is here. So what I'm doing is I'm populating a temp table. So this is my start table. So that'll be my WCBE database, and I populate that information into a start table. Then I write to the log again, and then I populate my end table. And you can see the SQL that it produces. And then I write that to my log, and then what I'm doing is, oh, no, I didn't write that to the log. Yeah, I did. And then what I do is I add a column, the transaction code column, to each of those temp tables. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually making each column the same data type, because sometimes it comes over from WCBE and it's different when it's translated into SQL. And so I'm forcing all the columns to be the same data type. Then another save to the log. And now what I'm doing is, let's take a look here. I'm doing an insert, update, and delete. So the first one is determine the deletes. Select everything into a temp table from the start table where it doesn't exist in the end table. So I'm assuming that the end table here is WCS and the start table is WCBE. So everything that's in WCBE that doesn't exist in WCS, I want to delete. And so I'm updating, I put all those records into this temp table, and then I update that temp table with a transaction code D for deletes. And then select the results and enter that into the log. Actually, and then I do the same thing for inserts. So I'm selecting into the temp table everything from the end table where it doesn't exist in the beginning table. So everything that is in WCS that's not in WCBE, I assume that's going to be an insert. And so I put that into the temp table and I mark it with an I here. And then I write those results to the log. And the only thing left to do is updates. And so you select into that temp table everything from WCBE with a strict inner join on WCS, using those foreign keys, and then you update that transaction code with a U. So that's what I'm doing. Obviously this didn't take a real long time to do, so I'm sure it's rife with errors, but go ahead and take a look, tell me what you think. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just taking all that. If there's a delta table that already exists for this comparison, this date for this table for this comparison, then drop it and recreate it and take everything that I just put into this temp table and save it to this delta table. That's pretty much all we're doing.